Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedditGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. And we're going to start things out with ray tracing. Will GPUs of the future require ray tracing if you want to play the latest AAA games? Well, the answer is yes, according to Morgan Maguire from Nvidia. Morgan Maguire is definitely well respected in the industry. He's worked at Nvidia for about 10 years now, unsurprisingly, focusing his time primarily on ray tracing, but is also a university professor, has written numerous books, and has worked on a lot of titles, including, but not limited to, Roblox, various Marvel games, and even has contributed to Unity. So once again, he has been around the block, and yeah, I think it's fair to say that he is very well respected. He recently tweeted though that, in his opinion, 5 years to pervasive for ray tracing. I predict that AAA games will require a ray tracing GPU to run, and this will ship in 2023, he says. And so on every gaming platform will offer accelerated ray tracing by that year. And of course, this would include things such as consoles. Now, the 5 years to pervasive roadmap that he's put out has a couple of key milestones. The first one being the first video game, which was Tennis for Two in 1958. There are a couple of things that some people may take issues with. For example, you could say that the first gaming PC with the Atari 800, yeah, technically there may have been some things before that, but it really depends on how you count them, plus the image is a little bit wrong. Pervasive home gaming with the NES, in the United States that was probably true, but 8-bit computers were really popular in the UK and a lot of Europe. But yeah, you can certainly take that slide as pretty accurate up until now. First GPU, GeForce 256. This is also accurate because the GeForce 256 was the first card to offer hardware, triangle and lighting setup. So before that, basically TNL was all taken care of by the CPU. And so the GPU, well actually the video card, excuse me, basically did things like texture mapping, really. 2004 we saw pervasive GPU because Doom 3 required you to have a GPU to function, although there are actually some mods for retro gamers out there where you can get Doom 3 running on like a Voodoo 2 or a Voodoo 3 card as well as others, but it doesn't render 100% correctly. And then in 2018, we see the first ray tracing GPU, which was Turing, which also some people would take issues with. It was probably the first mainstream GPU which featured ray tracing, but one can argue that Imagination Technologies graphics solutions did actually have ray tracing prior to this, but Nvidia certainly made this mainstream, particularly for PC. So I guess it depends on your perspective on how you want to take that. I would argue that Nvidia's slide is correct with an asterisk. Anyway, so what do I think of this requiring ray tracing? Well, honestly, by 2023, I wouldn't be surprised if it's accurate, simply because the next generation consoles are going to be embracing ray tracing. With the PlayStation 5 as well as the next generation Xbox all but confirmed to feature hardware ray tracing, and 5 years is a long time in graphics, as I'm sure all of us can agree. I don't think every AAA title, I don't know if necessarily every AAA title will require it, but I wouldn't be surprised if the large portion of them either require it or it's a heavy recommendation. Will that be RTX technology, or will it be DXR, which of course is Microsoft's more open standard? It's basically the DirectX API for ray tracing, and at least currently, unless DirectX gets an update, works alongside DX12. So yeah, who knows what's going to happen in the future regarding ray tracing and what standards actually are adopted by developers, but I do personally believe that there's a very good chance that by 2023, ray tracing is going to be a pretty big standard. I wouldn't be surprised if basically every AAA game out there does have ray tracing technology implemented into it, maybe with the odd exception of games which are created to not necessarily look 100% realistic. So I guess the 2023 version of, say, Fortnite. Next up, we are going to be discussing the next generation consoles, because shock and panic, you have a pre-order which has appeared on a Swedish website, mediamarket.se. And you can actually pre-order not just the PlayStation 5, which a lot of websites are running the story with. They're saying that you can actually pre-order the PS5, but you can also pre-order the Xbox Project Scarlett, because obviously the name for this console has not actually been revealed yet. And both of these systems are available for pre-order for $1,000-ish US dollars, which is, well, quite the chunk of change. Clearly, neither Microsoft or Sony have revealed the prices for their systems, but it's extraordinarily unlikely that they would charge anywhere close to $1,050-ish US dollars for their system. And indeed, a couple of Swedish people have said that, well, this is just very typical for this retailer to put the prices at a very expensive price, because, well, that way there's no shocks and horror when the consoles are finally launched. So it's just kind of how they do things. It's just their modus operandi. I think that they've put this up so early simply for the purposes of people discussing their shop, getting backlinks, and honestly, it's not that big of a deal. We've seen a lot of websites do this recently because, well, it's talked about a lot, but the reason I wanted to cover it is because I've already had a couple of people messaging me asking if there's any chance that this is going to be like $1,000, and, well, just no. Just like in yesterday's video, there's an awful lot of AMD news, so we're going to start things out with several new Ryzen 3000 SKUs that have been discovered on the internet, and then we're going to move over to new RDNA-based GPUs. But we'll start things with the easiest of the pieces that we're going to cover, and that is that the Euro-Asian Economic Commission, ECC website, has actually listed multiple unannounced third-generation Ryzen processors, and these include the Ryzen 9 3900, not the 3900X, might I emphasize, the 3700, the Ryzen 5 3500, and also 3 Ryzen series Pro chips. Now, all of these are potentially just placeholders, and so these chips may not come to the market eventually, but I wouldn't be surprised if at least several of them did. So the Ryzen 9 3900 has actually been rumoured for some time now. It is, of course, still a 12-core, 24-thread processor. The difference is that it is only 65 watts compared to 105 watts of its X counterpart. We also have the 3700 non-X. We don't know the specifications of this one yet because, well, the 3700 X is also 65 watts, so potentially it's just got slightly lower clock frequencies. And there's also the 3500, which is not an X, and it's rumored to also be 6 cores, 12 threads. Potentially, this is going to be an OEM processor only, much like the Ryzen 5 2500. Although what's going to happen with the clock frequencies and all that stuff, who the heck knows? Probably just going to be lower clock frequencies. It's also possible that AMD may decide to disable SMT, but just like always, that's very doubtful that they would do that, simply because it doesn't seem to be something that they would do with the Ryzen 3000 series. So my guess is it's just going to simply be lower clock frequencies. And we also have a couple of Pro parts as well. So the Pro CPUs are the Ryzen 9 Pro 3900, the Ryzen 7 Pro 3700, and finally the Ryzen 5 Pro 3600 processors. As the name would imply, Pro is really aimed at business use, and typically it's considerably more secure. It has additional features like secure boot, memory encryption, secure production environment, and so on and so on. The specifications are usually identical though to their non-Pro counterparts, So basically the performance, if you were to benchmark the two CPUs, is pretty much interchangeable, with the obvious caveat of silicon lottery, in other words how well the processors boost with different environments and that type of thing. But basically there's no real difference here. So if you're a home user and you're wondering, well gee, should I buy a Ryzen Pro processor or just the vanilla processors, unless you're doing something where you feel that you need the additional security, then I would just recommend going with the regular plain old Ryzen CPUs. And now we're going to move over to more RDNA stuff, and this comes to us from the Chinese website mydrivers.com. According to their sources, the Navi 12, we'll get into the code names more in a moment because there is definitely some conflicting information regarding the code names of the GPU, but I'm going to read the article verbatim before we discuss that because it's going to make things easier. So the Navi 12 GPU is said to have an area size of 170 millimeters squared. If you're wondering how this compares to the RX 5700 and 5700 XT's GPU die, well that's around 251 mm squared, so around 80 mm squared smaller for the Navi 12 core. The number of compute units is said to be between 22 and 24. So potentially this could be like the 5600 and 5600 XT maybe, which would put it at the top end of 1536 stream processors, and this is teamed up with 128-bit or 256-bit of GDDR6 memory. With up to 8 GB. The TDP of the GPU though is only 120 watts. There is actually some evidence that these specs are right. We've actually seen a couple of benchmark entries already with this GPU, and indeed it did say with the GFX bench that it did have 12 compute units, but with the way that that is misreported in that particular benchmark, you have to double the number because it just doesn't register correctly with RDNA. You basically double the number, which would put it to, of course, 24 compute units. And then next up is the Navi 14. The size of the die drops yet again, just to 110 mm squared. So it's, well, the technical term is titchy at this point. And also features between 12 to 14 compute units, which means a grand total of either 768 to 896 stream processors. The memory configuration though is just 128 bits, although it is still using GDDR6 memory, but the amount of memory is only going to be 4 GB. So this would be the RX 5500 series, so we can imagine that's going to be the 5500 and 5500 XT. The performance of this card is going to be closer to something like the GTX 1650 and the Navi 12 GPU, which we're going to call the 5600 series. That's going to be closer to something along the lines of a 1660 Ti, possibly a little bit faster, a little bit slower, depending upon the clock frequencies. So this is where things become a bit conflicting, because Komichi, who has been very accurate in the past with RDNA leaks, still believes it's Navi 12, which is going to be the higher end GPU, and this information tells us it's going to be Navi 12. To be honest though, I mean, from our perspective, the code names could be, you know, Mary Has a Little Lamb 12. It doesn't really matter. What I'm primarily focused on are the specifications and, well, how good a value it is. However, according to this information, we will not see a 5120 stream processor GPU. Instead, it will remain at just 4096 for the highest end SKU. And potentially we could have over 5000 stream processors maybe for the next generation RDNA. That's another rumor that's floating around. But either way, to be honest with you, a RDNA based GPU that has 4096 stream processors, it's not exactly going to be a slouch, is it? It's still going to be way faster than, let's say, the Radeon 7, and I don't think it's going to be slower than the RTX 2080 Ti. I suspect it's probably going to beat all of Nvidia's GPUs currently, which, to be honest, that's fine, because AMD are releasing this. I mean, let's even assume it drops in the next couple of months. I'm not saying it will, but let's just assume it did. That's basically a year after Nvidia. So I think that's fine. I think Nvidia to be finally topped by AMD, you know, in the high end, it's fine. AMD have certainly, you know, taken long enough to release the highest end SKU. But hey, it's great news for us anyway as consumers, because with any luck, AMD are going to release that GPU at a good price. And it's clear anyway that on the lower end, AMD will release more cards, because Scott Harkelman has already said that there are plans that AMD are going to release more graphics cards. And besides, we've seen a couple of benchmarks now, albeit the benchmarks are not, you know, the best out there. But furthermore, it just makes sense. I mean, why would they only have the 5700 and 5700 XT, but then rely on Polaris, you know, the 580, 590, 570, and so on, to take on Nvidia's Turing-based 16 series? It just doesn't make any sense. So I suspect that they're waiting for the supply of Polaris GPUs to start drying up, in other words, for the inventory to be shifted, and then of course what they can do is go ahead and release these new cards. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the market from AMD. I'm focused mostly on the pricing here as well as the performance, because ultimately the price is going to be what a lot of people are going to be interested in. Nvidia got heavily criticized with the with the original Turings when they got launched. Nvidia were heavily criticized when Turing first launched for increasing the price of their graphics cards, although I do think it's better now that the Super Series have come out, because you can argue that you're getting a higher performance tier for essentially the same price, so that's definitely good. It's just a shame that they didn't launch like that, but hopefully Nvidia have learned a lesson, and I am curious what Nvidia are going to launch for their 7nm GeForce cards next year. With any luck, you've enjoyed today's video. If you did, then you know what to do. Click the like button and also subscribe to the channel for much more content. And definitely comment down below if you believe that ray tracing will become a requirement for GPUs of the future. And you can also find us, of course, linked on social media in the description box right down there. With all that said, have a great day. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.